So, welcome to this episode of the HRD Talks podcast, where we talk with HR directors and people directors about their journey into HR. We get their insight into current trends in the world of work and take their advice on the future of HR and how HR professionals can deliver value and progress their career. I'm Nick Elliott, employment lawyer, and I'm excited to welcome Andy Stephenson, Chief People Officer at Equiniti.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Really pleased to have you on. I've been waiting for this for a little while. Looking forward to chatting through some good stuff. Usually we start with our guests along the lines of, how did you get into HR? And I know that story, and I particularly like that story. So do you want to start there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I'm still not entirely sure how I ended up in HR, but the starting point is really when I was about 15, and I went on work experience to what is now known as Currys to go and sell some TVs. And actually, I was remarkably good at it. Yeah. So I ended up staying there for 10 years, which is a pretty good stint for work experience. But as I worked my way through the ranks, and I was a salesperson, then I ran stores, and I ran areas and various other things, I actually found the further I got away from selling things, the less I enjoyed it. So I was actually quite good at it, but didn't really enjoy it as much. And there was an opportunity to try my hand at training people. So I went to do that and strayed a little bit off the textbook of how you should sell and taught people the way that actually worked, which funnily enough is not hard. It's talk to people, ask them what they want, and then just give that to them. Yeah. So it's not rocket science. But I discovered pretty quickly that as people came on courses and they went away and then they'd phone me up and go, oh, I did that thing and it worked, that I actually found that teaching people and training people actually gave me the same buzz that selling things used to do. And so I thought, oh, this is quite good. But I also realised the D and an E I'd left school with probably wasn't going to get me very far. So funded myself to go and do this CIPD thing that I'd heard about because that seemed vaguely interesting, and kind of went from there really. That's how I kind of meandered into HR.
Yeah, no, I love it. And then in terms of your career path, obviously you mentioned Currys. You've been at some big names that lots of people will have heard of. Great employers, great brands. Do you want to talk us through some of that?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I did 10 years in Currys. Then I went to Virgin, and I think Virgin is just a phenomenal place to work. Yeah. I always maintained that I think if I hadn't been married with 2 young kids, I'd have probably stayed at Virgin forever. Okay. I maintain to this day that you don't really understand what work hard, play hard is like unless you've been in an organisation like that. But that was phenomenal. I mean, I was in a retail part of Virgin. We opened 96 stores in 10 months and nobody really thought that was that fast. So, and then I spent a period of time at B&Q. I've ran big learning teams at Vodafone. I spent a good number of years for DFS. So, I arrived and the sale was on and I left and it was still on, so I didn't do too bad there. But then I've also worked in automotive companies. I've worked for Waterstones and now loving being at Equiniti, which is a huge global organisation.
And there's clearly a retail theme there. Does that come from that kind of initial work experience at Currys? Do you have a love for that sector in particular, or is it just kind of fallen that way?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I'm a retailer at heart. I did that for a long time, and having spent so long selling things and helping people, you love it. During the early part of the COVID lockdowns, I was working for Waterstones, and actually when we could reopen the stores, it was great to get in there and be on the tills and actually provide great service to people. But I've also done telecoms, I've done automotive, I'm now in financial services. So the beauty of HR is that the skills can transfer. And much of it is very much the same. You know, if you can engage people in one industry, you can in another. But there is a little bit of me that thinks when eventually it's time to wind down a HR career, I might find myself selling TVs in a retail store again. I think I'd quite enjoy that.
I'd come and buy one from you for sure. So you mentioned education as well, and it was wrong of me not to use your full title when introducing you, but you have a doctorate.
I have, which I accidentally ended up doing. So, I mean, as I said at the start, I managed to make a bit of a mess of my A-levels, mostly by working too hard as opposed to studying. So for a long time, my highest qualification was a level 2 NVQ in retail merchandising, which actually was incredibly valuable and taught me an awful lot. But I did go back and do some qualifications. And then years later, it was when I was at DFS, and I was actually doing a lot of work on customer experience and how you improved it. And we used a thing called the Net Promoter System that some people will be familiar with. There's an employee version as well for measuring employee engagement. And I was really fascinated by, lots of people said if your NPS go up, your sales would go up. Nobody really knew by how much. I spoke to more consultants than you can imagine to find out. And then I went on some training courses to learn about it, and then I went and spoke to the people who invented the thing, and none of them had the answer. So I thought, I might as well work it out myself. So I went on some courses and did some work with Staffordshire University and started to get near to the answer and collect data to work it out. And then kind of colleague, as she is now from an academic point of view, turned around and went, you do realise you've kind of done most of the work for a doctorate. You just need to do the writing up bit. And I went, okay, well, yeah, I'll do that then. That sounds really sensible. And then 4 years later, I'd finished writing it up. So
a lengthy process.
It was a lengthy process, but really, it's really fascinating to produce something that for literally a fraction of a second, you're the only person who actually knows it. Yes. And, I wouldn't, clearly my doctorate's not in something like physics that changes the world, but a little bit of difference in how to make companies better. So
this is probably a difficult question, given that I know that was no doubt a lengthy piece of work, but what have you taken away from that research, that writing that you apply now kind of in your day job?
I think it is the fact that you have to be really thorough at what you do, and I've often had a philosophy of do less things well, and I think the angle that particular academic piece of work ended up at was to how you take something like Net Promoter Score, and lots of companies do that, but how you actually make it part of the culture, and to distill 105,000 words or whatever it's down, it is link it to everything. And so lots of people do superficial things, they tick a box, but they don't really think how it integrates into every part of a business. And if you don't do that, then it's never going to stick around, it's never going to really change. And probably if I can add one bit onto it, it's make sure you take more away than you add in. I find too many people in business, too many people in HR are great at adding on new initiatives, but it just becomes an ever diluted pool of things that you've got to do, and things that in many cases managers have to do. And it's really important that you just take stuff away and make it reasonable. I once remember in one of the companies I already mentioned, but that will remain nameless for this exercise, I once sat and printed out every single communication that was sent to a manager in a week, and just printed it out into one pile, and then worked out how long it takes to actually read it. And it was nearly 2 working days. And then people were surprised that it wasn't getting done. What a shock. So I'm a great fan of get it on one page, make it really clear what the outcome is, and just do less things brilliantly.
It's a really powerful exercise, no doubt, to land a massive pile of paper on someone.
It's quite funny when you drop it into a meeting room, particularly with the comms people who sent it all out.
I can imagine. So one of the things, we've obviously known each other a little while, one of the things that I've always been impressed with when it comes to the roles that you've carried out, and I guess you've been relatively low key on some of the roles that you've had, because a lot of those big names that you've mentioned, you were the chief people officer or HR director at those places, but you always seem to have had a wider role in HR.
Yeah.
So have you actively gone after the other stuff, or have you kind of attracted it, or how does that work?
I think I'm the go-to person for things that need a bit of TLC, generally what it is. I mean, I've ended up with professional qualifications in HR, and I'm a huge fan of things like CIPD qualifications, and I think they're great, but I still don't fundamentally think of myself as a HR person. I spend a long time in sales, spend a long time in ops, and I think what I do, if I do anything well, what I tend to do quite well is build good teams, and build good teams, nurture them, support them, get out of their way and let them do that. And the beauty of having that as your kind of only or primary skill set is you can turn it to most things. So over time, I've kind of started roles in as you say, that chief people officer type role. But I've ran IT teams and audit teams and customer service teams and various other things. And it's the same philosophy. Don't try and understand or do the job better than the people doing it, because that's just never going to happen, and you'll be a poor leader. But if you can really help them to be the best, get rid of the barriers for them, make sure they focus on things that matter, that skill set's transferable. So I've had the brilliant opportunities to do some very random things, from organising massive live events to managing £1 million fleets of vehicles and various other things. But it's people. It's just look after people. And as I say, if you're going to be a leader, whether it's a HR leader or any other, if your philosophy is to create the environment for people to do the best they can, then that seems to do the job.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that we spent some time working together through was COVID.
Absolutely.
And
I think I spoke to you more through COVID than the people I actually lived with at the time, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, it was. Obviously, the world has changed fairly significantly on the back of that pandemic.
Yeah.
The world of work has changed for a lot of people. What do you kind of take away from that experience of COVID itself, and what's changed since?
I mean, I think COVID just showed the fantastic ability of a huge range of people to be adaptable. And, some of the things that people in the wider population did, that were vastly more important around things like vaccines and so on was phenomenal. But, even for us, humble shopkeepers as I was at the time, the ability to completely pivot an organisation. We went away from being a retailer with stores on a high street. This was when I was at Waterstones, to being a massive warehouse operation where we literally had rows of artics down the street because books were fantastic for people's mental health, and we were pretty much the primary supplier of them. And to pivot an organisation in that way, as well as all the things that lots of other people did around home working and so on, I think just showed the adaptability and the resilience of people. I think kind of longer term, coming out of it, personally, I think the kind of transition to a much more hybrid way of working, a much more, in many cases, people-centred way of working. I think COVID was an accelerator, as opposed to some of those things came out of that. I think they were coming anyway with the generational shift of people working and the ever-increasing ability of technology to let you do the job. But I think COVID probably knocked 10 years off the journey.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right.
And it definitely gave me some grey hairs.
Yes, you and me both. I've never been busier, that's for sure.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I remember talking to you when somebody mentioned the furlough scheme. And I remember us sitting there literally on the first day it had been announced going, well, we'd better do this then. Yeah.
Well, I the podcast's not to hear from me, but I remember that call from you on the Friday night when Boris and I kind of reel out this story quite regularly, where you phoned me up and said, "Oh, I've just heard the announcement." I said, "Yeah. What is furlough?" And I said, "I've got no idea."
Absolutely.
And then you said, "Oh, okay. Well, we're going to need to work it out because we're going to furlough nearly all of our people next week."
Absolutely.
Early next week.
It's a great example of between when you have good partner organisations as yours was at that time. We knew it was the right thing for our people. We knew it was the right thing for our business. We didn't know how to do it, but we worked it out, I think, in 48 hours over a weekend, and then ended up showing people in the public sector how to apply the thing they'd come up with, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Special times. So in terms of other sort of trends that we are seeing at the moment, and obviously depending on when people are listening to the podcast, it will vary, but at the minute, cost of living crisis is a big thing. Wage inflation linked to that is difficult for people. And, we've got people striking in the public sector, nurses, teachers, the whole lot. How are you kind of seeing that at the minute?
I'm not going to comment too much on some of the public sector ones. Every organisation has to deal within its own context. Certainly in the organisation that I'm in, there is a balance in that people have to realise that, the first duty of an employer is to employ. And so you've got to build a sustainable organisation that is able to invest in its people in a manner that it can continue to do so. And, I would love more than anything to be the highest paying organisation in the country, but you've got to do what's within your means. We aim to do the right things. So within Equiniti, we went through quite a large programme about 18 months ago to very accurately level all the roles in the organisation. It's very transparent what level you are in. It's very transparent how you can move through those levels. We even structure our training programmes to show you what skills can move you up to the next level. And then we have very structured salary bands that are a combination of the skills in that and your performance in that role. And I think if you're transparent with people, that goes an awful long way. Now, you then do make decisions. We were very fortunate to be in a position that we've accelerated our annual pay review. So we would normally do that in April. We've actually done it now in January. And clearly that's our way of saying thank you to the 6,000 global colleagues we have that help us be the brilliant business that we are. But equally, would people like more? Of course they would. Would we like to give them more? Of course we would. And our commitment to people is, as we build our business more and more so, we'll continue to invest in our people. But I think what's often missing is that transparency, that bit of what actually can we do? When can we review it? How can we do it? What mechanism exists? We did somewhere in the region of 200 internal promotions last year. Great for the business to keep talent in the organisation. Great for the individuals to move through the ranks of the company. So, it's that mix of be clear, be transparent, and help people move through. Our employee engagement has more than trebled over the last 18 months. And part of that's because we've, as a leadership team, just been very focused on transparency.
And it's interesting the way you're describing that, though. I think when I think of transparency in that way, it's people knowing what other people are paid. But actually, you're talking about transparency as to what you need to do to progress and develop and that kind of thing as well, aren't you?
Absolutely. It's simple things like, there could be a big debate that people have whether you should link pay to performance and so on. We choose to. We think that's the right way. And there's other weights and measures. But if you're going to do that, then your performance management process has to be good. So we moved from an annual system to a quarterly system. It means that people's performance is balanced and normalised, and in truth, they're not just getting rewarded or unrewarded on the last couple of weeks of the year, as it were. So we do that. We train people how to do that process well. And I think one of the most important things is if we use a numeric scale, if you give somebody a 4, what do they need to get a 5? If you give somebody a 3, what did they do? What should they have done to get a 4? And as long as you're really clear with people as the parameters, then I think that's fine. So this is not transparency in the way that maybe you get in some parts of the public sector where you go, this is the job ban from this to this. Although I think, interestingly, we will probably go there one day. But this is transparency, is how it works, what's within your control, what's within our control, and how can you make a brilliant career.
And obviously, you've talked a bit about Equiniti. Let's go there. Let's kind of set the scene on that business. Maybe not a brand that a lot of people will have heard of necessarily, but they're a big organisation working in a lot of different areas.
We're a huge organisation, and it's one of those, when you start to talk about it, people remember that they may have got a dividend letter or a cheque or a pension statement through the post. So we have ambitions to be the leading global share registration company, and we do have other services. We're one of the largest in the world as it is now. So some of the biggest brands in the world that you've ever heard of trust us to look after their shareholders. And as a result of that, so our customers are the biggest brands in the world, but we have 20 odd million end users who interact with us on a pretty regular basis. And then, as I say, we do complementary services as well. And to give you a sense of the scale of those, the civil service pension scheme is one of the things that we run as we do retirement solutions for other organisations. We have a big business that supports financial institutions with remediation. So where they get things wrong, we can help them put things right. But effectively, we look after the shareholders of some huge organisations, and that's both here in the UK and in the US as well. So we're the largest at what we do in the UK, we're the second largest in the US, and then we have pretty big supporting functions in other countries as well. And I mean, from my point of view, what's pleasing is recently we've actually been named as one of the top employers in the UK, the US, and India. So independent assessment of what we do has kind of certified, for want of a better word, the HR practices and policies that we do. And it just shows that on a global basis, we are absolutely investing in our people in the way that we say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic. And has there been a strategy during the time that you've been there to kind of get you to that place?
Yeah, I mean, the business has always been phenomenally customer focused. You can't do what we do with the kind of clients that we have and not be absolutely outstanding at giving great service. I think from an employee point of view, we maybe weren't as sharp as we could have been. And we've been very focused on really three areas. One is around making sure that the people who work for us have that customer focus at every level. So it's not just that you're processing, you realise what that does for the end user in all cases. We have an absolute focus on leadership. So big investment, our largest ever investment actually in training and development, some of which even in this hybrid world is back to good old fashioned classroom training, because there is a place for that alongside digital things. And then probably the most relentless part of what we've done is a focus on employee engagement. So you have to measure it, and we do. We ditched the annual survey in favour of a monthly check-in with that takes sub 5 minutes. But I shared with you earlier, I can look on my phone at the 22,000 bits of feedback that we've just received in the last few days. But that's something we concentrate on at the leadership level. And the biggest bit with that, though, is, it's what do you do? You need to listen to people. So the biggest mistake people make with any sort of engagement strategy is to ask the opinions of all of their workforce and then do absolutely nothing with it. So, off the back of our workforce's feedback, we have launched new corporate values. We've done initiatives like people were telling us when they worked at home in a hybrid world, they'd go back to back meetings. So we actually changed the settings in Outlook so that our default meetings are now 25 and 50 minutes. So it forces a break into everyone's day. But that came from employee feedback, and this is what we want. And so, as with anything, you can't do everything that everybody wants, but it comes back to that transparency. So myself, the CEO, other members of the executive committee, we'll actually go on a global broadcast. We will talk through the key things that have come out of that month's feedback, and we'll commit to what we're doing. But if there's things we're not doing, we actually say that as well.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, because I agree with you that one of the common mistakes is get the feedback, ignore it, or not communicate about why things are happening or not happening. How do you deal with here's the stuff we can't do?
Literally like that. Now, occasionally, in the interest of transparency, so, when we were talking about bringing a pay review forward and people were saying we want to do something, you can't confirm you're doing that before you do. So we would be honest and go, we are looking at something, but at this point we don't have a date we can tell you. Some things you just go, no. We've committed to put electric vehicle chargers in all of the sites that we are able to. But the key there is able to. So some of our sites we can't for various different reasons. And so you just have to say to the people there, we would love to, but it's actually beyond our control. So it's complete just transparency with people.
And some honesty.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And for people who work for me, and you try and do this on a wider basis for the business, you may like what I say or you may not like what I say, but it will be what is happening.
Brilliant. What other sort of trends are you seeing, or challenges do you think we're facing moving forward?
I think I go back to how COVID accelerated certain things, and I touched on generations. I think one of the bits I'm acutely aware of is you look at this generational shift of how many roles people have in a career, which was being identified, a long time ago, but I think it's really coming to the fore now. And you look at people, dare I say it, of our generation, and actually, as we rattled off all the companies I worked for earlier, it sounds quite a lot, but actually, it's not.
And you're not that old.
Yeah, and it's not that many. But in there, there's some sizable stints, 10 years, 7 years, etc.
Yeah.
I think what is becoming more and more prevalent is people want to work with a company, not for a company, and they want to do it for a small period of time before they go and do something else. And I think a lot of organisations just aren't really engineered for that. Yeah. They're engineered for somebody to come in, learn a skill, take a year to get up to speed, move it through, and build that career. And then it's a surprise when people turn over in 2 years. The reality is, I think we need to get to a place where the philosophy is we're going to bring people in and we need them to be brilliant for however long they're here. And if that's 6 months or 12 months or 2 years, great. But let's maximise it. And then let's also keep in touch when they move, because they might want to come back. And I'm not adverse to... I can see a place where if you've got a brilliant employee, we might onboard that same employee 3, 4, 5 times through their career, because they come in, they work with us, they go off and learn something else, and then they come back again. And we've started to invest time and energy in alumni groups to really keep engaged with people who have just got to the point of going, they love us, they love us as a business, but they want to do something else. And we've been running those for kind of 18 months now, and we're starting to get the first successes of people coming back. And I think that's brilliant. So I think it's this, as I say, a philosophy of how do we work with you. And if you link it back to what we were talking about on pay, where I say it's about communicating what people can do for themselves as well as what you do, that's got to be your mindset with your employees, not the old command and control.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So within the HR profession specifically, what would your advice to kind of people starting out be if they were thinking, that people stuff sounds pretty interesting?
Going to be a doctor, going to be a nurse, something like that.
Don't do it.
Look, I think HR is a brilliant bit of the organisation. I absolutely love it. At the end of the day, you think what we are there to do is to help people be the best they can be. It's just a fantastic place to be. You have got to reconcile that occasionally, and probably on more occasions than we'd like, for some people the way they can be the best they can be is not in the organisation they're in. And so there is a degree of times when you need a thick skin to be in this industry, and particularly in the end of it that yourself and your team sometimes have to operate in. But I think you've got to have that in mind. It's about how you support and make others be brilliant. If you want to do it because you want to look good and you want to build the brand, it's probably the wrong bit of the business to be in. The other bit is, HR is increasingly becoming important, but it's never going to be the poster child of organisations. That's going to be other parts of the business. So I think if you truly want to help people and you are truly comfortable being part of a team, then it's a brilliant place to be. But if you're more at the individual end, and you're in it for yourself, it's probably not the bit of the organisation to be in, and it's certainly not the bit to be in if you're on easy life. That's definitely
that makes sense. And then I guess at the other end of the spectrum, there'll be people who are maybe in an HR manager role or an HR director role, looking at a kind of chief people officer role, thinking, what do I need to do to get to that next level, to be, to have that top job? What would you say there?
I think it's a couple of bits. I think you've... I'm going to split it in two halves. I think you've absolutely, on the one hand, got to be rounded in your business. So if you sit in the HR bubble, that really isn't going to cut it, because go back to you've got to support people. You can't support them if you don't understand a semblance of what they're trying to achieve. And so, I think you need to get out there and you need to be in the business units, whether that's just spending time with them or being in their meetings, or ideally if you can get secondments and go and actually do that job in some parts of those business. But I think to be a true partner at the senior level, you've got to have a pretty good commercial mind as to what's going on across the organisation. The other one is, I think, as I said earlier, building teams of people who can do the job better than you is the aim. But in order to do that, you've got to know a little bit about lots of things. The classic, don't be an expert, any of them, but you need to know a lot. So, as I say, I'm a big fan of things like CIPD, and I know some HR people have various views, from the incredibly positive to the not. But I think the idea of a career map and the things that it's got on there, that does give you the good foundations. And for as much as you've got to be on trend with the latest bits of digital HR and so on, there's an awful lot to be said for having a bit of an understanding of things from 100 years ago about why they happened. And so I think a good academic grounding is often overlooked these days. It's one of those, I've never been able to work out cause and effect, but if I do map my career, the qualification level I have and the job level I'm at have kind of mapped pretty accurately all the way along. So I would focus on your own learning, both in terms of the theories and the skills of this industry that we're in, but then probably equally, if not more importantly, understand your actual business.
So Andy, one of the things that obviously I'm aware that you've done is worked with a number of different boards at board level in that top job. Do you have any advice for sort of navigating that as the people person in the room?
I think there's a couple of bits. I mean, firstly, in any job that you go into, and I've had this many times, you don't go into the job knowing how to do it. And that's the job description, in some cases the change of company, as well as the change of people that you're dealing with. So the first thing I'd say is don't be afraid to get some help, and whether that's a mentor internally, whether that's a critical friend that you've got in or outside the organisation, or whether you've actually got a paid for specialist coach. Certainly when I got my first what you call CPO kind of job, I had a coach who worked with me just to help me organise my thoughts and where to go. And interestingly, they weren't a HR person, they were actually a strategy person, but proved to be incredibly useful in terms of getting there. When it comes to talking to the individuals, it makes no difference whether they're the board, the executive team, the people in your team, and I don't think really the level matters. It comes back to what I've been saying all along, which is, I link it back to when I started selling TVs. If you want to be successful, you find out what people are interested in, what is on their agenda, how you can help them meet their agenda, and then you find it's considerably easier. Now, you hope in a good organisation, in your question about board members, that there's a good degree of alignment between those people. And if there is, then that means as you talk to them and you listen to what they need, it hopefully becomes pretty easy to work out how you can align the people part of the organisation to deliver that for them, and therefore for the wider workforce. So I think it's be prepared to have a blank sheet of paper when you go in, be prepared to ask for help, and be prepared to spend the time giving the people and the organisation a really good listening to. I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I suppose the other bit linked to that for me is, having seen you build a few teams, you seem to have a self-awareness as to your own skill sets, the things that you do well. And my impression from the outside is, and you might tell me I've completely missed the mark, but is that you find people who maybe will complement your skill set or fill gaps where you maybe are not as strong. Is that fair? Do you actively do that, or is that just
to
happen?
To a degree. So I do like to think I'm reasonably self-aware, and I would strongly encourage people I know and my teams to give me feedback on a pretty constant level. Absolutely. I said at the start, my job's to build teams that are better at what they do than I could be. And in a lot of areas, that's not too difficult at all. But that also applies not only to the skilled parts of HR, be it reward, L&D, the generalist HR. I don't just mean that. I do mean in that kind of how you act kind of way. So my go-to psychometric of choice is insights. You can use others, and I've used others through the career. I used MBTI for a long time and so on. But for those who are familiar with insights, it gives you a readout of the colours that you are. And certainly green energy is not top of my list of things I have in abundance. So I will always and deliberately in HR leadership teams, I make sure there's people who have that at the right level and are confident enough with it to challenge me, so that we get a rounded view across the organisation. So it's very important you have people that have different skills from you, have better skills than you, and that think differently than you. And that's absolutely deliberate and crucial.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you've mentioned a number of times kind of partner organizations. One of the things that we do on the podcast, because we don't have a sponsor as such, is a supplier shout out. So who would you kind of recommend as a third party provider that's kind of delivered value or supported you?
Yeah, I'm gonna sneakily mention a couple, if I may. So one that we're currently actively working with is Workday, who are provider of digital HCM systems in our organisation. Not only run the HR system but the finance system as well. And I think what's brilliant about Workday is they devise the software to do a lot of the thinking for you. And I think I see far too many organisations try and implement HR systems by adapting them to their own peculiar methodologies. And I think what I've seen with something like Workday is it's cutting edge, it's got a lot of experts in there, and if you put the system in and let it do what it does, it adds huge value. So we're just... I talked about the fact we do monthly engagement surveys. That's done through that system, and it helps managers to build an action plan that is proven through AI to deliver better results than if they try and work their own out. And a bit like you spend a little bit of time thinking, can I beat my sat nav? And you never really can. Once you realise that the system can listen to thousands of people for you and give you the answers, that's hugely powerful. So they're one. The other one, and to declare an interest, I worked with this company for a long time and now actually do advise them on some areas. But I think there's lots of companies in search. I've ended up doing a little bit of work with Armstrong Craven, who I love working with. And the reason is they've got a very different approach. So they actually can help you map a market and look at talent that's in there. And they can also help you assess your existing leadership team. And when you look at it compared to your strategy, give you a view of whether that leadership team has the ability and the mix to deliver what you need it to do. And then help and advise you on, if they can't, who are the kind of people who can. And that kind of, I think I mentioned earlier in the call on a completely different subject, that kind of planning things and doing it well often doesn't get applied to areas like search. And so I do like a business that can actually help you do a very complete view of how do we get better talent into the team that'll help us deliver better.
And bespoke, particular to that
to
team,
that scenario,
which is
not just here's somebody who's good in this skill set.
Good FD or
exactly.
Yeah, makes sense. That is interesting. And then just to finish off, so obviously you've operated in some big companies. You're working in a global environment at the minute with Equiniti. What health and well-being is a big focus for a lot of organisations at the minute. So I guess there's two elements to this. One is, what have you guys done in that space across the business? But also for you personally, like you're operating in fast-paced, highly charged environment, big corporate. How do you kind of look after yourself, I suppose?
Yeah. So I'll probably do me first, actually, and then I'll come on to the corporate. I mean, my way of release was always to go and watch Stoke City Football Club, but actually that's just these days increases my stress levels as opposed to actually decreasing it. So I'm hopeful. We seem to have signed some players in this window, and hopefully we'll get back to better days.
Looking up.
But that is still something that I do. I mean, I have in past interviews, so in earlier in my career, I've had mental health issues. And therefore, I think it is incredibly important that you focus on that. I do think work-life balance is important, so I will make time to exercise. I've got no problem, and you clearly can't do this every day in any job, let alone the sort of job I've got. But, I'll take a choice to get up a bit earlier, do some emails, do some work, but then I'll switch off for an hour, a couple of hours in the middle of the day,
Yeah.
go for a run, go for a walk, listen to a podcast like this one, although you may be asleep by halfway through this one. But, and then you pick up again after. And I think people are sometimes afraid to do that. But, we've got to start to link it into work. We have things like an EQ running club that is on Strava. And actually lots of our employees are on there. So if I go for a run in the middle of the day, actually lots of our teams can see that I've done that. Yep. So it's no secret, and I'm quite open. And clearly different jobs have different pressures. If you're in call centres, that's more difficult to do. But that's why, as I say, we, at a corporate level, we've done things like put breaks in. We organise pretty wide-ranging corporate challenges, so running challenges. We did a cycle to Lapland over Christmas that you could do indoors or outdoors. So we actively encourage people to kind of focus on that. We've trained lots of mental health first aiders, which is really important. We have employee assistance programs in every country that we operate in. So we've got it on the agenda. We want to do more and more, but it is just about giving people resources, encouraging them to do it. And as with everything, whether it's well-being, transparency on pay, whatever, lead from the front and show by example. So, if those of us in the Exco are happy to show that we balance, and, some days, unfortunately, you have to do a 16, 18, whatever hour silly days, but balance it out and don't be afraid to admit you're doing that at a different point.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. Excellent. So I think that's probably the end of our time together. It's been really, really interesting to hear you share all of that. So thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
And we'll see everybody next time. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the HRD Talks podcast. Hopefully you found the discussion helpful. If so, please follow us on your podcast provider to be notified of future episodes, and share with friends and colleagues. For more information on the podcast, please visit actons.co.uk/the HRD Talks.